Chapter 16. The First Find. Shortly before noon, the yellow convertible rolled along the quiet main street of Brookwood. Large, pleasant white houses with wide lawns and lovely shade trees stood on either side. "Nice old town," Frank commented. And then he added, "Fellas, let's be careful with Miss Donner and not make the same mistake we did with Colonel Thunder." "How do you mean?" queried Chet. "We insulted his family pride. These Donners seem to be touchy people. If we aren't careful of what we say, we won't learn anything." "True," Joe agreed. "And maybe we can find out a little about Elizabeth from somebody here in town before we call on her. And then we can say we met her attractive brother while searching the woods for a man that we believed lost." "Attractive," snorted Chet. "Okay, Chet," said Frank. "I'd like to know what this town thinks of Elizabeth, too. And here's the place to learn something." Before Joe and Chet could protest, Frank had pulled up before one of the old houses, which had been converted into a business establishment. "Blue Willow Tea Room," Chet read from the sign outside. "Oh, no. We're not eating in a tea room. They wouldn't serve hot dogs, and that's what I want. Most of their customers are friendly, fussy old ladies on diets." "Right you are," Frank chuckled. "And who would know more about Miss Donner than the old ladies? Anyway, I remember Mother mentioning that she once ate in this town, so let's go." A little bell tinkled discreetly at the door when it opened. Frank, Joe, and Chet, with their singed hair combed as well as possible, and their red shirts buttoned at the collar, sat down awkwardly on dainty little chairs placed around the little table. "Good morning," a tall woman of middle age, wearing a tiny starched apron, came forward and eyed them with sharp suspicion. "Good morning," Frank responded with a wide smile. Rising to his feet, he said, "I think my mother stopped here one time. We'd like to have some luncheon. How cool and restful a nice tea room is on a hot day." Charmed by Frank's manner, the woman smiled. "What would you like, boys?" To Chet's astonishment, he was soon enjoying a puffy omelet, a tasty vegetable salad, and a tall glass of iced tea, spiced with a sprig of fresh mint from the garden. "Say," he declared, "I'll have to eat in tea rooms more often." "Well, pick up your napkin," teased Joe. "That's the 5th time you've dropped it on the floor." "This is Brookwood, isn't it?" Frank asked the woman, as she brought strawberry shortcake for dessert. "Miss Elizabeth Donner lives here, doesn't she?" "Oh, yes," the woman answered. "Perhaps your mother has ordered dresses from Miss Donner. She's a perfectly wonderful designer, you know. Customers come to her from all over. She works right in her own home." "No," Frank said, "it wasn't that. We know some other members of her family." "Oh, yes, Miss Donner comes from a very good old family. She's a lady, to be sure, but very firm, too, about her business. It's marvelous how well she does. The family has broken up, though, I understand. I don't believe she ever sees her brothers now." The woman went off to seat a new group of diners, and the boys had no further chance to speak to her. As the 3 friends walked toward Elizabeth Donner's house, Joe exclaimed, "A dress designer! What are we going to say to her, for Pete's sake?" "We'll think of something," Frank replied confidently. "You mean you'll think of something," Joe corrected him. "Count me out." "Me too," Chet chimed in. With that, the two marched away, leaving Frank Hardy alone on the steps of a well-cared-for white clapboard house. Near the door, a little sign invited, "Ring bell and walk in." So Frank found himself in a well-furnished parlor used as a waiting room. Since no one was there, he had time to examine the thick rug, the fine furniture, the tasteful wall decorations, and the well-filled engagement book, which stood open on a little table. Evidently, Elizabeth Donner's business was a profitable one. A door opened softly, and a tall, handsome woman in her late 30s, with dark hair and the commanding Donner look, came in. At the same time, a little brown dog scurried through the door at her feet and threw itself happily upon Frank. Stooping to pat the animal, the youth noticed one white ear. His mind raced. A brown mongrel with a white ear? No collar or tag? Could this be Bobby Thompson's Skippy? Concealing his suspicions, Frank laughed and stood up. Friendly little pup. A friend of mine had one just like him. Maybe it's from the same litter. Where'd you get this dog, Miss Donner? I don't really know where he came from. The woman's manner was friendly but firm. A brother gave him to me. The poor little thing was lost, and he befriended it. But he couldn't keep it himself. Oh, was that the pleasant Mr. Donner, who went with me into Black Hollow to look for a lost friend of my family's? Elizabeth Donner shot a searching look at the youthful visitor. I wouldn't know, she answered evenly. By the way, what brought you here? Carefully, Frank sidestepped the question. Hoping his voice sounded casual, he said, I was wondering, do you take clients living at a distance? My mother loves to wear attractive suits and dresses, and since I was in the neighborhood, I thought I'd ask you. Miss Donner smiled. You're an unusual boy, aren't you? She said. Not many sons are that thoughtful. Have your mother write to me, and then we'll see. Watching the tall, self-possessed woman narrowly, Frank wondered, is she playing a game? Does she believe me or doesn't she? But Elizabeth Donner's smile told him nothing. I'll do that, he answered, and quickly left the house. Deep in thought, he returned to the car. He told the others what had transpired, adding, I think I found Bobby Thompson's dog. Donner probably gave the pup to his sister soon after he stole it. Skippy? Chet sat up astonished. What does that man do? Steal dogs for the pleasure of giving them away? Don't ask me, Frank answered. That's all I could learn. Except that Miss Donner does very well with her dressmaking. I'd say she probably doesn't need any estate money. Or any dishonest money either, but you never know. Okay, so this is a blind alley, said the disgruntled Chet. Where are we cooking and sleeping tonight? There's only one place to solve the mystery of Black Hollow. And that's Black Hollow, declared Joe. I vote we camp near there. Frank jingled the coins in his pocket. We'd better solve it pretty soon, he warned. Money's getting scarce. What will we need for tonight? A few cans of food, answered Chet, and a couple of flashlights. And a pad and pencil, so Simon can communicate with us, put in Joe. After buying these necessities, the three friends started back for Black Hollow. At Joe's suggestion, they drove slowly. Let's take our time, he said, and not get there until after dark. Then nobody will know that we're around. Accordingly, Chet cooked supper for them at the roadside fireplace and picnic table, and at 8 o'clock they headed once more for the hollow. Showing only the parking lights, the big car climbed slowly up Rim Road. They passed the lighted Thompson house, and the boys knew that they'd nearly reached the top. Once there, the trio hid the car among some trees and started off on foot. Only a few stars sparkled in the sky. Clouds as black as coal were massing in the west. With a flashlight beam jabbing ahead into the darkness, Joe led Frank and Chet a little way along the hollow trail, and then off to one side. This spot's level and well sheltered, the youth exclaimed. I've had it in my mind in case we had to sleep out. After unrolling their sleeping bags, Chet's had been kept in the trunk's car, the three boys removed their shoes and crawled in. Lying on their backs in the darkness, Frank and Joe stared upward at the trees. A light wind made the hemlocks sigh. From afar they heard a whippoorwill's call. Presently, from the hollow, came the sad, familiar wailing. "Screech Owl," Joe murmured. A few minutes later, the night was broken by a number of screams. "Uh-oh, there's the witch again," said Joe. "Joe, isn't that the same screaming we heard our first night here?" Frank noted. "It's not so harsh, so insistent. This really sounds like a barn owl. The screaming the other night, I'm sure it was human." "Maybe," Joe yawned. "Anyhow, this one's an owl. Nothing to get excited about." In a moment, Joe was asleep, and then Frank. "Help! Leave me alone!" The cries came from Chet Morton. Frank and Joe started up, blinking sleepily. Chet's having a nightmare, thought Joe. But as he became wider awake, he saw a tall, shadowy figure hovering over the bundle that was Chet Morton. End of chapter 16.